A frail figure shuffled through the imposing double doors, wrists bound by cold steel. Under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, he seemed almost a ghost, shoulders bowed, coat hanging loosely around him like a mournful banner. The clerk's voice cut through the hush. "State your name." In a voice as brittle as winter glass, the man replied, "Elias Carter, Staff Sergeant, United States Marines." A simple declaration, but no one in that courtroom realized it would crack open a 20-year-old wound, one neither law nor justice had prepared them for. What unseen storm was about to erupt? Judge Olivia Parker leaned forward, her pen poised above a stack of papers. She skimmed the case file, expecting routine details of trespass and misdemeanors. But then her hand froze. Her cheeks drained of color, her breath caught in her throat. The name on the page wasn't just another defendant. It was the name of the Marine who had carried her beloved brother out of a firefight in Fallujah. In that instant, the courtroom's stale air shifted. Charged with a memory neither statute nor precedent could touch. Could a judge remain impartial when fate had delivered her brother's savior to her bench? At 69, Elias Carter looked a world away from the decorated sergeant he once was. His face was a topography of loss. Deep creases carved by years of grief. Eyes dulled by nights spent on cold concrete. His oversized military coat, once crisp and adorned with medals, hung limp, swallowing him whole. No medals shone at his chest now. Only the dull fabric of second-hand shelter clothes. Under the scrutiny of the sterile courtroom, he carried not just the weight of his charges, but the invisible burden of battles that linger long after weapons fall silent. How had such valor been reduced to a man fighting for warmth? The prosecutor, a young attorney in a neatly pressed suit, rose with practiced poise. He laid out the charges: disturbing the peace, trespassing, resisting arrest. He spoke of Jefferson Street Cafe, where Elias had lingered near an alley vent, a simple bid for warmth mistaken for loitering. He cited 3 formal warnings this month alone, each complaint forwarded by the cafe owner. He recited the officer's testimony. Elias refused to vacate the premises at 11:45 p.m., even after being ordered. Recommendation, he concluded: 30 days of community service and a downtown no trespass order. Such an order would lock Elias out of the only shelter he had. It would force him into the coldest months without refuge. Was this justice, or cruelty dressed in legalese? Judge Parker tapped her gavel lightly. "Mr. Carter, do you have legal representation?" Elias met her gaze, confusion flickering across his lined face. He shook his head. "Would you like to speak for yourself?" she asked, her voice even. The courtroom leaned in as Elias cleared his throat. "No excuses," he said softly. He simply needed warmth. His words echoed in the hush, a stark contrast to the prosecutor's polished arguments. Could a single plea for warmth be considered a crime? When the judge pressed him further, Elias's voice found a firmer edge. He spoke of Jimmy the cook, who sometimes slipped him half a sandwich. He mentioned his father's service in Desert Storm. Finally, when asked about his own record, Elias straightened in his seat. "United States Marine Corps," he said. "Staff Sergeant, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, 1975 to 1995. The courtroom seemed to breathe a collective intake, as if stripped of their preconceptions by that single fact. Under his worn exterior, buried pride found its voice again, and Judge Parker's stack of papers trembled in her hand. Could a man once honored for valor now be condemned for survival? Just then, a tall man in a tailored navy suit strode to the defense table. Briefcase in hand, he introduced himself as Alexander Ross, newly retained to represent Mr. Carter, pro bono. The judge's brow arched. Such an entrance was unheard of at the last minute. Ross requested a brief recess to confer with his client. Judge Parker's eyes flicked between them before she nodded curtly. 15 minutes. As the courtroom emptied, Elias leaned toward Ross, whispering that he couldn't afford a lawyer. "You won't need it," Ross replied, voice low. "My firm, Williams, Ross and Parker, takes this on pro bono." What twist of fate had placed such a champion in his corner? In the solitude of her chambers, Olivia Parker finally let her robe fall around her. She slid open a drawer and retrieved a faded photograph. Her younger self, arm draped around her smiling brother, Lieutenant Jack Parker, in his Marine dress uniform. Beside it lay Jack's final letter from Iraq. Its edges frayed by tears and time. She read the passage. Staff Sergeant Quinn charged through enemy fire, dragged me to safety. She closed her eyes and saw Jack's funeral, his uniform folded into a flag. While a Marine approached her parents and said, "Your son saved my life." He never finished that sentence. He didn't need to. Now, 2 decades later, the man who had carried her brother had walked into her courtroom as a defendant. Was this reunion divine providence or a cruel coincidence? Judge Parker returned, mask of judicial neutrality firmly in place. Ross stood and requested dismissal of all charges. Mr. Carter wasn't trespassing, he argued. He was surviving. We'll show cafe employees gave him implied permission. The prosecutor opened his mouth to protest, but a raised hand from the bench silenced him. I have questions for the defendant, the judge announced, her tone steely. Mr. Carter, your file lists Fallujah. April 17th, 2004. Were you part of an OP on the western edge of the city? How would Elias's calm recollection reshape this case? Elias's eyes brightened with the weight of memory. Yes, ma'am. We were escorting a supply convoy when an ambush hit. Lieutenant Parker took a hit. His words were soft, steady. I reached him, dragged him behind cover. He told me to go help others, but I couldn't leave him. A hush fell. He confirmed Parker had made it to Germany, only to be killed weeks later by an IED. His voice quavered as he admitted he'd wondered if saving Jack only delayed the inevitable. Could a single act of mercy carry such a lifetime of guilt? A silver-haired Marine stood abruptly in the gallery. That's him, he said, pointing. I was there. He saved 6 of us that day. His voice was calm, unwavering. The prosecutor began to object, but Judge Parker pounded her gavel. This court recognizes military service as deeply relevant. With that, she recessed the trial for another 10 minutes, eyes never leaving Elias. For the first time they met, defendant and judge, each seeing in the other the echo of the past. What power does acknowledgement hold in a world that too often forgets? When the court reconvened, Judge Parker did not reach for her glasses. She spoke not as a jurist, but as a person. She revealed Jack had been her brother. Her voice cracked. The lieutenant had written home about the sergeant who risked everything for him. Colonel James Matthews stepped forward with a young corporal and master sergeant, bearing a polished wooden case. Inside lay a gleaming Navy Cross, the second highest honour. The colonel announced Elias's Silver Star was upgraded to a Navy Cross for extraordinary bravery on April 17th, 2004. Gasps rippled as the courtroom rose in salute. Even the prosecutor stood, caught between decorum and decency. Could recognition at last lift the shroud that had cloaked this man for decades? Judge Parker's tears glistened as she pounded her gavel one final time. In light of these extraordinary developments, all charges against Staff Sergeant Elias Carter are permanently dismissed. A ripple of applause swept through veterans, lawyers, and civilians alike. The Master Sergeant approached Elias with a tablet, his VA disability rating updated to 100%. Retroactive benefits reinstated. Jimmy the cook, tears in his eyes, revealed how his father had spoken of a Marine who saved his platoon, Staff Sergeant Elias Carter. The prosecutor moved forward, apology trembling on his lips. Elias stood amid the rising crowd, his posture now strong as though years of unspoken honour were finally being lifted. How does a man rebuild a life when justice arrives so late? Weeks later, Elias stepped into a small apartment furnished through a veterans' housing program. Walls were bare except for one frame. His newly awarded Navy Cross flanked by recovered Purple Hearts. He ran a hand over the polished wood, breathing in a reality he'd long forgotten. There was a knock. Opening the door, he found Olivia Parker. No robes, just herself, holding a small box. Inside lay a bundle of Jack's letters, tied with faded ribbon. He wrote about you every week, she said softly. Elias unfolded one, dated the day after his Fallujah rescue. Thanks to Staff Sergeant Carter, no Marine gets left behind. Tears welled as Elias looked up. I'm not a hero, he whispered. Olivia smiled gently. That's exactly what heroes say. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady, blanketing the city in quiet white. For the first time in decades, Elias Carter believed someone had remembered his name. And in that single moment, a broken heart began to heal. Isn't that the truest measure of survival?